Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mid-American Gardener. I'm your host, Tanisha Spain, and joining me in the studio today are two faces you will surely recognize, two of our regulars. We've got Chuck and Phil here today. Introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about you, and then we're going to jump right in.
I'm Phil Nixon. I'm a retired extension entomologist from the University of Illinois, so I cover essentially anything that crawls or flies that has at least 6 legs.
The bug guy, all right.
Yeah.
Chuck?
Hi, I'm Chuck Voigt, and I'm also retired from the University of Illinois. I was a vegetable and herb specialist there. Also as an undergraduate, I took pretty much the gamut of horticulture courses. So you can probably stump us, but not easily between
Gotcha.
us.
Between the two of you. Perfect. Okay, let's jump in because you guys brought a lot of stuff to talk about. And Phil, you're starting with insects.
Well, one thing that we look at as gardeners is how you can pollinate various pollinators that you may have and so on that are out there in the garden. And we tend to get real excited about butterflies, which are decent pollinators, but not near in the same area as bees are. They've kind of developed themselves to be very efficient at collecting pollen and nectar, and so in the process, they spread it very well from plant to plant. One that we tend to overlook, one major group that is very important, are the wasps. And although wasps do not have near as many hairs to collect pollen as bees have, and their hairs are single, whereas bees have branched hairs, which actually collect pollen and very, very efficiently. You will find wasps are effective because as adults they feed on flower and nectar. Mm-hmm. They are there and they are picking up the pollen and they are moving it to other sites. And so the first picture that we've got is of a paper wasp, which is feeding on goldenrod, and so it's and you can see that it's got the yellow pollen that is just essentially enclosing the end of its abdomen. It's up on the wings, it's on its face, it's on its legs, it's everywhere. And when it goes to another plant, it's going to bring that pollen with it and go along and transfer it. And for those of you who still think that goldenrod is associated with hay fever, notice that it is sticking and hanging on to the wasp. And even though that's a bare surface, as it brushes against the pollen, against the flowers, it's picking up the pollen and it's sticking to them. Pollen that bothers us hay fever wise is smaller. It is not sticky. It moves in the air, and unfortunately ragweed tends to bloom at the same time as goldenrod, and with green flowers on the ragweed, which are not really obvious at all. If you're not into a little bit of botany, you don't even know that they're blooming until you come back and your pants are just covered with yellow pollen if you've been walking through it. But at any rate, they are the source of, and other plants are the source of hay fever in the fall of the year, late summer, rather than goldenrod. And so goldenrod really isn't a problem. Another wasp that I've got pictured is a thread-waisted wasp. They are going to feed on a lot of pollen and nectar as adults. And if you look really close, you can see that there are a few white specks of the pollen here on the side of the thorax area, just below the middle leg, above the middle leg right there. You can see some pollen grains. You can see some towards the back leg. You see a few spots on the wings. This one's not near as it's on a flower which is not picking up near as much. This happens to be a carrot that survived to the second year and is in bloom. And so its pollen is not near as heavy as the goldenrod, but still it's going to move pollen from one flower to another. The next photo is that of a parasitic wasp. They're not really efficient at pollinating like bees are, but they do get around to do it. One advantage that many of the wasps is that they tend to fly at lower temperatures than some of the bees do, and so maybe out there on cooler days in the fall or in the early spring. Remember, that's when your fruit trees are blooming, and so very efficient, helpful there. The parasitic wasps are very small, as you can see in the final photo, and that is showing that on this blossom of St. John's wort, that it's a relatively small insect, but still they're effective at moving it around. You don't have to be big to carry something as small as pollen. And so think in terms of your wasps as well as your bees when you're looking at things that are going to be beneficial in spreading pollen to other plants, both wild and domestic.
Okay. Did you want to talk about your book now,
I'll
or
do
do it
that later.
on the next one? All right, Chuck, we're going to go to you with some show and
Okay.
tells.
I have a do as I say, not as I do moment, okay?
Okay.
I brought in various tender bulbs, some of which I've talked about before, others not so much. And now in the winters would be a perfect time to be down in the basement or somewhere and be dividing these and getting them cleaned up and ready to plant. I usually find myself sitting in the grass doing it, wasting time when I should be hitting the window and getting them planted that day. But should you choose to take my advice, this is not a bad time to be doing this. This is the tuberose, the Polyanthus tuberosa, and they spread out each year. And so ideally, when they get to maybe my fist size or even your fist size, they should be divided. The problem with that is they're very prolific, and very soon you'll be inundated with them and need to pass them around to your friends, which I plan to do with this one today if anybody's interested here.
Of course.
Now, the interesting thing is, there's last year's foliage. It just happened that they got a little frosted, and then I went out with a mower and tried to cut off the bulk of the foliage because there's a ton of it. As it happened, it was dry all season, and then right before I needed to dig them, it rained. So there's a good fair amount of mud and stuff sticking on them here, but you can see that some of these are loose, just kind of sitting around the outside, and those would come off very easily.
Gotcha.
Others, you can just grasp it firmly. I have a knife here if I need to.
So we're not just setting the entire clump. We're going to space these out.
Yes, and that might be a good sized division to be using. The thing is also, the ones that bloom this year, that bulb is done, but it already has a row of pups around its base. So I don't feel that has that.
Okay.
But you can see that there's lots of offsets coming there. And so from this you could get a ton of things. I was just looking at it online today, right there. And if you price these things, some of the more exotic ones are like almost $10 for one. That would be for that.
Oh my gosh.
So my advice is seek out a friend who has them and treat them right. And when they're doing this division, you can, there's just a ton. And like other perennial kinds of things, they start to suffer when they get too thickened. So, and they don't come apart too hard.
Schedule-wise, let's talk about that. When do they bloom? When do they start to come up?
Well, plant them probably just before the last frost. You can probably get by with it, or you can do it through May probably.
Okay.
They're frost sensitive, so you don't want them that way.
So be sure.
I'm not sure how much further south you have to go. I had a friend in the Louisville, Kentucky area for whom he could leave them in the garden. He could also leave gladiolus in the garden, and they would overwinter.
Interesting.
So just it depends where you are in mid-America,
Okay. Okay.
whether or not you can do that. They come up. I'm trying to remember the sequence. It was. I didn't get them in especially early last year. I think that first one that I brought in was maybe July. That was a single one, and that was the first one that came out. And then some of the doubles and some of the colors came in after that.
Gotcha.
I may have misspoken with that one that I brought in, because I called it pink because the buds were pink, and the ones I remember had green buds. It came in a mixture, so I don't know really what
Gotcha.
its provenance is. I'm glad to have a single one, because I bought singles twice, and all of those turned out to be double.
And then when you are planting these, where in the bed would we put them? Is this a border? Is it going to grow?
Well, it's going to be a rosetta foliage that doesn't get under a foot high.
Okay.
And then the flower stalks shoot up maybe 18 to 24.
Okay. So be mindful of that when you're.
And then, once the bloom is done, you can cut off the flower stalks, and then it's just foliage that kind of is a nice background for something else that might, chrysanthemums or something that are blooming in the fall.
Sure.
Certainly from here north, you need to dig them every year.
Okay.
So
All right. All right.
that's the Polyanthes tuberosa
Now,
part 2.
I've got to. You've heard me talk about these tulip bulbs all year on the show last year. Guess what? They did not go in the ground, and I found them in the basement, and they are beginning to sprout. So I brought them in today to bear my shame and get advice for all of us, because I can't be the only one that didn't get their tulips in when they were supposed to. So
We'll give you some sackcloth and ashes when the service is over.
So tell me now. We kind of talked about this a little bit before the show, but we're leaning toward I'm probably going to have to grow these in a pot this year, perhaps. You both had different takes,
Well,
so
the pot would be the simplest at this point, I think.
okay.
And I'm forcing them in a pot is never the best thing for long-term survival, because the ones that they force in greenhouses and you buy at the store don't really come back all that well. But that would be more dependably going to happen. On the other hand, if we do get thawed out again, which after the below zero temperatures we've had, I don't know. Right now it looks favorable for it warming up quite a bit. Phil mentioned that you didn't really want to mud them in. Well, when it's been frozen
what I
like
get.
this, mud is probably
not have any choice.
Mud may be what you're faced with. If the frost goes out and you can dig holes, go ahead and do it that way. Otherwise, I would get them started in a pot, water them in, put them somewhere cool so that they can develop roots first, and then when spring happens, take those pots outside and let them do their thing out in the sunshine.
Now, if I do put them in pots, once they are spent, once the blooms are spent, do I leave them in the pot until the end of the season, or can I then immediately put them in the ground where I want them for the long haul?
You could probably plant them.
Go ahead and plant them? Okay. See, that timeline works better because it's just not so cold.
Well, and if you let them go ahead and go through the whole series and the leaves die in the pot, chances are we'll be having this discussion next January.
Yes, we will. So I knew I was going to be shamed, but I had to do it for the viewers.
Well, the other side of that coin is leave them in the pot. You have to remember to water them
That's true.
in the middle of the summer. If you put them out in the ground, you don't.
That's true. That's true.
You know, there's a situation there that fits into my mode of operation that you had to get them
Keeping
planted
things
if you
simple.
can. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, tulips are interesting also in that once they die down, they would prefer my major professor would slay me. They do better if they're not wet, because they come from the Middle East and so it's okay to think, well, I'm going to put annuals there to have come in and have summer color. but those annuals are going to want to be watered, and that is not in the best interest of the tulips. So just be aware of that. That's one of the reasons why tulips are not a long life perennial in most of our situations.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to get back to both of you for one more round. Phil,
Well, we go look at the wasp pictures again and talk about a little thing differently associated with that. And that is that the difference between bees and wasps is that wasps are as larvae are predatory, and of course the larvae of both bees and wasps are white-looking grubs with no legs, and so the larval wasps are fed in the nest by the mother, or if it's a colonial wasp, by her sisters as well, and so where do these things come from? Well, they come from the adults catching them. And when we look at paper wasps and yellow jackets and these are primarily caterpillar hunters or other larval hunters. And so they will go out and they will capture caterpillars, which, unless you're trying to raise a bunch of butterflies, we tend to think of caterpillars as being the larvae of moths, and they feed on our plants, and probably not a good thing to have. And so they're helping the gardener in not only pollinating plants to a lesser extent than bees, but they are getting rid of caterpillars in the process too. And so the difference is that the wasps are an older group. They actually first show up in the fossil record at the same time as the earliest dinosaurs in the middle of the Triassic period. And so they predate flowering plants. And so they figured out a way, and you can see this in adult yellow jackets or paper wasps or various other things. They'll feed on insects, but if you happen to have a dead mouse in the yard, you'll see yellow jackets all over eating that too. They're going to take advantage of any high protein meat product they can find and utilize it. So as it doesn't move too fast, they'll eat it. So essentially, or if it moves very fast, because many of our hornets actually catch houseflies on the wing. So they will, that's what they will feed on.
So how much danger am I in now that I've slowed down?
It's, I think as long as you're moving faster than a maggot with no legs, you're in good shape.
Okay.
there you go, Chuck. That's the benchmark.
There's your benchmark.
Faster than a maggot with no legs.
I think I can still manage that.
So the other wasp that we showed, the biggest, other big one is the Fred-waisted wasp, and they're going to be feeding on spiders, which are generally considered to be beneficial to the gardener, in that they feed various other insects, They're not insects themselves, but they will. But these are all captured and put into colonies to feed to their young. The parasitic wasp will live inside other insects and kill them of a variety of different types of things, from scale insects all the way up to caterpillars. And so wasps have got this two-side thing, and both the adult, which will move pollen around, as well as capture insects to feed its larvae, are looked at as being beneficial to the gardener. The honeybees came along back in the Cretaceous with the older with the more younger dinosaurs like Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus Rex, when actually the flowering plants were out. And so they assumed to have kind of co-developed along with the development of angiosperms, or flowering plants, the things that have the pretty flowers. And they have pretty flowers so that they can bring in bees to help with their reproduction. So this is all puts them in context into how bees and wasps are kind of different, and how they function differently, as well as being different in their anatomy.
Excellent. And you've got a whole book that...
Yeah, and you have a book. And if you're interested in figuring out what kind of wasps you have in your garden, this is a great book put out the last couple of years by Heather Holm. She did a very good job with a bee book that I have. This one's half bigger than her bee book. It gives you an idea of the diversity of wasps that are out there. but it's very well written. You learn a lot about biology as well as nice pictures to identify the insects with, and so they are. It's a very useful book in order to figure out what you have, what you're doing, and learn a little bit about what's going on in your garden.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil. All right, Chuck, we're back to you with the.
Okay, well, I've got a few other things. I won't get as in-depth about them. A lot of people probably recognize gladiolus corms. Corm is just a shortened stem. Gladiolus and crocus are the two most common corms that you'll encounter. This one last year apparently had 2 buds because it ended up making two new corms. And the first thing you would do is take those apart. They do make little bulblets, which if you have good weeding skills, you can grow up into more bulbs. But they do come up with just like 1 leaf, and crabgrass and foxtail and those kinds of things can overtake them if you're not a really persistent weeder. And the other thing I would do is just take off last year's stem, because it can kind of interfere with the new buds that are gonna come out. This is Oxalis tetraphylla, which just means it has 4 leaflets. So it's a 4-leaf clover, sort of. This one is the iron cross because it has the tips of the leaflets are green. Back in the center, it's purple, and it sort of makes like a purple iron cross in the center of this. Very prolific. They get small pink flowers, lots and lots of little buds around the base. And if you insist on planting all of those, again, you're going to be overcome in a hurry. I tend to go through and pick out the biggest, nicest, fattest ones, because then I can place them and have them 3 or 4 inches apart. So it makes it easier for weed control and those kinds of things. Sadly, some of the little ones tend to go by the wayside in that process. Also, this is one, it's a Peruvian daffodil, Hymenocallis festalis.
That's a big one.
And here's the thing I found. I bought these kind of at a half-price sale at a big box store late in the season. Put them out that year. They grew, but they were not super happy. But then I dug them up, and what they'd done is they had split into like 4 or 5. And so, not wanting to waste space, I planted them as 4 or 5. Well, those turned into 16 or something, and never got big enough to flower. So this past spring, I gritted my teeth. I picked out the ones that were going to survive and the ones that were not, and I just planted a single.
That's a nice size one.
And it got fat. I'm pretty confident that is going to flower. They have kind of long, narrow petals. It's sometimes called spider flower in addition to Peruvian daffodil, but we'll see.
All right. I love that it's time to check on the bulbs and see what's going on. Karen always talks about that with her cannas, going down about this time of year, just making sure everything's okay, throwing out the ones that perhaps are a little rotten and not looking too hot. So, and quickly before we go, I've been seeing a lot about cicadas all over social media and on the news. I hear there's about to be like a convergence.
In Illinois, there is. And we have the northern Illinois cicadas, which occur from about Lincoln or the Illinois or the Embro River north, and the southern brood, which goes from there on south through the U.S. The southern brood is a 13-year cicada life cycle. The northern brood is from that north are all 17-year broods, and we're going to have those two coinciding in their emergence this year, in which the northern Illinois brood and the gray southern brood will come out at the same time. So in Illinois, we will have cicadas coming out around Memorial Day weekend, a little bit after that, from the northern edge of the state all the way through to probably Louisiana. So essentially all of Illinois will have cicadas, whereas normally we have the northern half only or the southern half only. And there are a few other little spots that will not have cicadas because they have different broods than the time, but these cover for the most part the whole state.
Okay, so, all right, just get prepared for that mentally. The
Lots of noise in the
and
daytime.
And every time you walk through the grass, up they spring. Oh my gosh. So get prepared. Anywho, gentlemen,
It's a
thank
great biological experience.
you for you. Thank you guys so much for coming in. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, you can send them in to us at yourgarden@gmail.com, and we will see you next time. Good night.